Oh shit, okay. Dödade in igen. Dibble.
That's the evidence. They could just search for mitigating factors for their client. And each of his litany showed a similar professional calm and total unawareness of the horror with which his testimony was received. He was a friend and colleague of Eichmann. They both came from Linz and called each other Duke. He knew everything about the Jewish question and the final solution. He had seen Eichmann's order from Hitler to carry it out, and could quote the subsidiary orders by which the policy was administered. He could also repeat the comment that Eichmann had made to him that if Germany lost the war, he would leap laughing into his grave, because the 5 million dead Jews were a source of such extraordinary satisfaction to him. His litany could retell his knowledge without a qualm, without an apology, without even the usual attempts to claim personal innocence. His evidence was so bold that neither prosecutors nor defense could find any questions to ask. General Bach-Zelewski, called as a witness in the General Staff case, was an alternative specimen of Nazi pathology. He was spare, respectable. To Biddle he looked like a mild and rather serious accountant. He described the savage reprisals and mass executions of the anti-partisan units which he had commanded in Russia. But he would not admit any responsibility for their actions. He distributed it among the whole Wehrmacht. Everyone had taken part. He claimed to have tried to modify policy, but complained that he was not given authority, or that publication of his orders was delayed. He produced the earliest example of what was to become a standard plea of so many Nazis at Nuremberg. He could not resign because, if someone else had been in my position, the disaster would have been great. In a final dose of humbug, Bach-Zelewski expressed disapproval of Himmler's call to exterminate 30 million Slavs. He condemned it as the logical consequence of our ideology, and added, "It is difficult for a German to fight true to this conviction. It took me a long time." Did he really imagine that anyone would respect his tardy victory in his moral fight? Certainly Goering did not. As Bach-Zelewski passed him to leave by the main door, Goering spat out, "Schweinhund, damn traitor." Strengthened by his newfound moral purity, Bach-Zelewski simply returned a pitying smile. As a punishment for his outburst, Goering was deprived of tobacco and exercise for a week. Andrus gave the defendants one of his headmistress's speeches on the need for quiet and dignified behavior. And from this time, all witnesses were taken out through the interpreter's door. In the two remaining witnesses for the American prosecution case, there was tragic illustration of how such men had used others, and what they had reduced them to. Alois Hohlriegel was a simple peasant with a thick Austrian accent. Before the Anschluss, he had been unemployed for many years. Consequently, I thought I would join the civilian SS, and there I would get work in order to marry my wife. He described watching men work to death in the stone quarries at Mauthausen, dropped 100 feet over the cliffs as punishment, and as warning to others. He could only laugh when asked why he had not reported such issues. Okay.
I know it's hard for you to talk about White Hart as an Arsenal legend, but did you enjoy playing here?
Well, when we won, I did. We won a few times. But you knew you were in enemy territory the moment you pulled up to the stadium on the way to the ground, actually. It was great because special games, the North London derbies, and we all used to love playing at this place.
This is today's Tottenham Hotspur team. I think that back four is really important for them. They've got to be strong and solid. They've got a bit of protection, haven't they?
They have. They should have more than enough. I mean, they're all good defenders in their own rights, but in front of them, they've got players who are going to be working really hard. Whether they can be a foot on the front foot, we'll wait and see.
This is the Liverpool side. Well, we've gone with a 4.
Rosenberg, Funk, there was consternation in the defending box. And then
3-3 formation here for them. Is that the way you see it, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, it can be adjusted. It could almost be a 4-5-1 if they decide to come over more defensive, this team, but if they're on the front foot, that three up front cause the opposition back four some problems.
On to the attack now.
Not true.
Here's the cross. They put that cross far too close to the goalkeeper. Now Hunter.
Rosenberg came to the camp in his black uniform.
Target is Kyle Walker.
Field great once the war started.
Shot. Never thought he was going to mess up.
No, you didn't. I mean, he's a cool head and he's one that never likes to smash the ball. Loves to just stroke the ball, but he can yet again.
The first goal, it's 1-0. Now Saka. Attacking well here. Keep the play through. Surely has to score here. Oh, that's all we've come to see. That's a brilliant goal.
Oh, that was schoolboy stuff. Having just scored, they concede at the other end. Lack of concentration.
In the end, it was a tap-in when the goalkeeper parried the ball into his path.
Well, you can get 20 goals like that a season if you think that quickly in and around the box.
Created certain difficulties for the prosecutors who now have to follow.
That's a bad fucking war, Jesus fucking Christ, you're...
Robert Jackson intended to use count 1 on
There's good progress with this attack.
as a means of keeping the bulk of the case in
Good
American
pass,
hands.
getting it forward.
His intended sleight of hand did not go
Just
unnoticed.
diverted it away.
The British were the first to spot that his broad interpretation of the conspiracy charge would allow him to protest
Liverpool will get the
Why?
other national
I don't understand when I'm fucking pressing the same buttons, I'm pushing the, I'm not seeing the right direction.
Members of other prosecutors in November trying to create clear areas of responsibility and to limit the breadth of the American case was the expression of their anxiety. Others were slow to realize that the American interpretation of conspiracy and their decision to present evidence not just on Nazi intentions, but on the act which resulted from them, would take the wind from their own sails.
Why
It
would
was
you
only
go
on the 12th
around
of December, during a meeting of the chief prosecutors, that Rudenko, with the backing of Ed Defoe of the French team, asked the Americans to leave the actual reading of many of the documents they were submitting in court to other teams as support for their case.
Liverpool take over possession again.
He insisted that every document the Americans intended to
it's not enjoyable.
when
Great
stories
tackling
suggested some
technique.
give and take,
Win the ball
and
cleanly.
pointed out that the Russians and the French had been
Good
cooperative
strong tackle.
in giving the Americans material to back their charges on slave labour.
This is an exercise in patience as they try to get an opening.
Catch it. No, I don't want past
The
it.
American approach did not seem to have changed at all. In fact, by this stage, it was too late to protest.
Run, you fucker, run.
Fucking
idiot, why can't you?
Well, that's straightforward for the goalkeeper.
Had been ready in court and made their entry.
Goes the ball. There'll be 2 added minutes. Angel Di Maria working hard. Just as the decision is made, it's offside.
Well, it's a hard one for the system there, but I think he's just got that right.
The use of cumulative evidence. Though the danger was clear, the other teams did not decide to prune the case. Too much work had been put into them to which to sacrifice it now. Too much national pride was involved. No one wished to
Well,
appear
how about
as
this?
their
Listen to the
offenders
crowd now.
to the
He's coming
Americans.
off, having really taken this game by the scruff of the neck.
He's a real favourite with these fans, an even bigger favourite now after that performance.
For those who had suffered Nazi occupation and felt they could do it more knowledgeably than the Americans.
No, I see, when these people like pretend like they're going to make a run and then they don't fucking make the run. When who am
At the end of November,
That's the chattel.
Yeah, go. There's massive amounts of space on that.
Looked very good indeed, but the move was broken down. Nathaniel Klein. Substitution for Spurs coming up.
They would not tolerate cumulative material, as they have shown during the American case, and faced with the technical problem of
cut
trying
out.
to present convincing cases with stale evidence, the other 3 prosecuting teams could only
Christian
seek
Eriksen.
confirmation.
why wouldn't you make a run? Fucking idiot, Alexander.
to make its point.
Some potential in this move.
Thanks to Maxwell Pike's determination that the British would not be squeezed out of the account of Nazi aggression,
Desperately trying to change this game. It's been level, now they're pushing on, looking for a goal that will take them in front.
But once the Americans had dealt with Nazi rearmament, the documents illustrating aggressive intentions and the story of the Rhineland and the Anschluss
freshening it up Liverpool with the substitute now.
December, while Sir Hartley Shawcross outlined the British view of the crime of aggression. Shawcross was in an unenviable position.
Oh, these backwits, man.
Danny Rose.
Furthermore, Jackson had already devoted much attention to aggression.
Yes, I'm gonna make run. Now cutting, you fucking idiot.
Dangerous position now.
I do like.
At least because it was in no way a pale reflection of Jackson. Shawcross's style, his manner of deliberate intellectual approach were entirely
Why do they
Trying to find an opening. Panicking.
Alex Hunter's a fucking idiot.
That's cleared out of play. It'll be a corner.
Shawcross was aware of the potential
Liverpool are going to make an alteration to their lineup for the bench. Feels the punch of the goalkeeper. Good technique. Shots up. And it's into the back of the net. Spurs have scored here.
The defenders just stood rooted to the spot on the edge of the box. What a poor one to concede.
Trailing.
Discipline himself to the British case in hand, and to showing how the relevant role public crimes as a defense. Sometimes he just nudged his listeners to consider the implications of the crime, but he issued no ringing challenges to rise to the opportunities it presented.
There's good progress with this attack. Now it goes into the wider areas where they've got a winger waiting. They've got a corner out of that, a bit lucky, it was deflected.
One newspaper described it as a lecture to a learned society in London.
Go, run.
Begins to back that up.
Yeah, you don't think you're coming into this match, Martin, and you've got to be evenly
Tries to punch it away.
Get the ball.
It's a terrible place to give the ball
So
away.
Hartley gave short shrift to any argument over the desirability or legality of the trial. He defined the British desire to establish a tribunal as being a recognition that victory is not enough, that
Tried
might
to
is not
tackle here, and
necessarily
he's
right,
done that.
that lasting peace and the rule of law is not to be secured by a strong arm.
On the clock.
He suggested that one
I
task
wanted
of the
it.
tribunal
Like, they know that the
and impartial record.
They've cut the pass out there. Maybe that will ease the pressure. It's a terrific effort by the home side here.
The waging of war is not only a positive pleasure,
These closing minutes.
Cries of the victors.
The best of it, that goal, and now the worst of it. Yeah.
What was needed was a judicial hearing based on law. Shawcross argued throughout his speech that the law which the tribunal was being asked to apply already existed. The only novel element in the charter was the introduction of machinery to carry it out. Aggressive war, as he put it, was a crime not because the victors in the recent war said so, but because international law since 1918 had defined it.
why would fans like
the law of the victors, but the accepted principles of international usage. It did not create law, it only created a jurisdiction in respect of what was already the law of nations. That law had been expressed in a series of international agreements and treaties, starting with the Covenant of the League of Nations and culminating in the Kellogg-Briand Pact. In addition, it has been channeled into a range of particular agreements with individual nations. Shawcross calculated there had been 99.
Oh, what challenge are you talking
Germany
about?
had
The
been
one
a
I
part
saw,
of
you
the
weren't anywhere near the ball.
Since he claimed that treaty is the accepted source
You
of
wouldn't point a challenge
international
like that,
law,
you make sure you
he
take the ball
dismissed as superficial
These days you can't
learning
go into
or
stop, so
culpable
the ref will send you off to the
sentimentality.
gap.
All suggestions that there was any element of retroactivity in the Charter as regarding wars of
Mark
aggression.
my words. I see you
The
pull
treaty
something
of
like that
the
again, we're going to serious
conclusively
problem.
established the corpus of law on which Count 2 was based. By signing so many of the agreements, Germany had knowingly limited her sovereignty and accepted international obligations. Logically, therefore, she must accept international judgment and punishment as a consequence of breaking them. Shawcross now focused his attack on the men in the defendant's box. The defendants could not shelter behind claims that only states commit crimes in international law, he said. Contrary to Jackson's definition, Shawcross maintained that the state is not an abstract entity. Its rights and duties are the rights and duties of men. But starting from a different
How should have been put to the reserve?
Conclusion. Like Jackson, he supported the view that it is a salutary principle that politicians should not seek immunity behind the intangible personality of the state. It is a salutary legal rule that persons who, in violation of the law, plunge their own and other countries into aggressive war could do so with a halter round their necks. Although hitherto individuals might not have been held responsible in courts of law for crimes against peace, the principle of individual responsibility had always applied to war crimes. By introducing it to the crime of aggressive war, the Charter was not retroactive, but simply filling a gap in criminal procedure. Nor could the defendants shelter behind claims of obeying orders. The common soldiers were not given that protection when orders were patently illegal. These defendants were far from common soldiers. They were no mere willing tools. They had power and responsibility. Political loyalty, military obedience are excellent things, but they neither require nor do they justify the commission of patently wicked acts. There comes a point where a man must refuse to answer to his leader if he is also to answer to his conscience. Shawcross's neat analysis of the law took only a third of his speech. The rest was devoted to a detailed and skillful account of Nazi aggression. He suggested that there was no point in trying to find a single, exact, all-embracing definition of aggression. Any definition at all would cover and cover abundantly and irresistibly in every detail the premeditated onslaught by Germany on the territorial integrity and political independence of so many sovereign states. But as he had already argued that treaty is the basis of international law, he concentrated on the breaking of treaties as the key to Nazi criminality under Count 2. As Shawcross examined in turn the invasion of Poland, Norway and Denmark, the Low Countries, Greece, Yugoslavia and Russia, his method was the same. First, he laid out treaty obligations towards each country. Both the broad obligations, such as those imposed by the Locarno Pact and the Peace of Paris, the Triumph Pact, by which Germany had renounced aggression in dispute, and the specific treaties of non-aggression with each state. And then he quoted the assurances Germany had given to each country, pointing out that Hitler had shown that he meant what he had said.
Just move it and then fucking do it.
To be kept only as long as they serve a certain purpose. It could be said, observed Shawcross, that an invitation from Ribbentrop to enter a non-aggression pact with Germany had been a sign that Germany intended to attack. The nearer Germany came to invasion, the more numerous and fervent were her avowals of peaceful intent. And finally, Shawcross quoted the plans which had long existed for each invasion, drawing attention to the careful preparation, the deliberate intent, and the role of individual defendants who had been privy to Hitler's ambitions and who had willingly used their positions to further them. Throughout, Shawcross established his point with a cold cloud. His case was effective because it did not rely merely on his frequent eloquence, but on the use of incontrovertible facts, treaties, military orders, the words of the defendants and their acts. It was all on record. Only in his peroration did Shawcross allow some fire into his oil. He had already conceded that the story of Nazi diplomacy, founded upon cunning, hypocrisy and bad faith, might seem less gruesome than that of their robberies, degradations and murders. But he warned that their conduct of diplomacy was no less evil and deliberate than their other crimes, and should it be taken as a precedent of behavior in international relations, its consequences to mankind will no less certainly lead to the end of civilized society. Shawcross called for punishment of the defendants as a step to restore sanity, and with it the sanctity of our obligations towards each other. For the rest, the speech had been deliberately low-key. It was no less effective for that. Indeed, Burkitt often told Airy Neave that, for lucid presentation and effectiveness, this was the best speech in the whole trial. Onlookers noticed the increased tension among the accused, as point after point was calculatedly launched and pushed home with meticulous attention to detail. The defendants followed his every word. Ribbentrop in particular, since so much of what was said concerned his work as ambassador and foreign minister. Even Hess stopped reading his novel for a time and took note. When the speech was over, all the defendants seemed visibly shaken. As the Sunday Times pointed out, Shawcross had not resorted to calling them names. Instead, he had undermined one of their main hopes of defense, that what they had done was not an actual crime in law. He had pinpointed each man's responsibility under the law and outlined all too clearly the nature of his act. The case on aggressive war was going to be much harder to answer than might have been expected. The speech was, on the whole, warmly received by Shawcross's professional colleagues. They, more than most, could appreciate its skill and its contribution to the prosecution case. Oddly, however, it came under fire from the Russians. Patrick Dean reported to the Foreign Office that they had pressed strongly for the deletion from the printed text of a number of passages which gave the impression that the Soviet government might have been misled by the Nazi-Soviet pact and the subsequent protestations of German friendship for the Soviet Union. They stoutly maintained that Moscow was fully aware of German intentions from the first and was prepared to go to war at any time with Germany. They also objected to the statement that after the collapse of France and the Low Countries, Great Britain was left alone to face Germany. Dean added, "The motive of these rather naive arguments is difficult to see. Indeed, the second of their complaints was to a historical fact. Shawcross had in no way implied that Britain remained alone to fight Germany to the end of the war. The first of their complaints was even odder. They did not protest at all, as they might well have done, at reference to the Nazi-Soviet pact. It would have been understandable if they had wished to avoid any hint of its protocol with the proof of their greed and ruthlessness. Instead, the Russian prosecutors were taking umbrage at a historical judgment, that they had been misled. In doing so, they risked giving the impression that the Soviet Union had signed the pact with as much cynicism as had the Germans, and it was the Germans who were now on trial, charged with using treaties as a convenience. National pride is all very understandable. No nation likes to admit that it was dull. But the Russians could have swallowed their pride in the interest of the prosecution case. Much better to show the Germans as duplicitous. Perhaps what was striking of all was their assumption that the official record of the proceedings could be doctored to suit the self-esteem of a prosecuting nation. Their demand was different in kind from the decision to hide the shame of Sam Hand. His remarks had not been in any way part of the case. Usually, it is possible to guess that the Russian prosecutors were driven into defense by instructions from Moscow. On this occasion, their complaint was delivered so rapidly that it seems to have been the conditioned reflex of the men on the spot. Once Shawcross had laid the foundation so firmly, the rest of the case on crimes against peace.
Why don't you make it like...
Alderman dealt with the American evidence on the takeover against Czechoslovakia, making it part of the conspiracy charge. In this way, the problem of whether it was technically aggression was avoided. The British came back to present their evidence on the other Nazi aggressions up to the invasion of Russia. It took less than 3 days. Sir David Maxwell Fyfe dealt in detail with the 15 main treaties which Germany signed, then broke, and dealt a damaging preemptive strike against the possible defense by pointing out that in German jurisprudence, the publication of a treaty in the official Reichsgesetzblatt automatically made it part of the statute law of Germany. And then his junior colleagues, Griffith Jones, Elwyn Jones, Roberts and Phillimore, covered each geographical area of aggression in turn. The method was business-like, even rough. They were thoroughly conversant with the relevant treaties and the diplomacy of the period, thanks to expert briefings from Jim Passant of the Foreign Office, who had stayed in Nuremberg until
been busy today, lad. Find me tomorrow morning.
Actually meant now. Carefully chosen evidence was placed in a brief, clear context. Where documents had already been read in court, they were simply referred, strictly summarised before being submitted.
What's the last two down?
The only colour came in Khaki Roberts' presentation of the case on Belgium. Roberts was an exotic intrusion in the normally prosaic Nuremberg court.
On a mission.
He was the personification of the rightist old favorite style. Every paragraph began with an orotone, "My lord." The tribunal had come to expect and welcome nothing extraneous from the British. When Roberts essayed a little hyperbole about the Nazis' oath of honour and the acts of a common criminal, they cut him down to sign. Mr. Roberts, I think we would like you so far as possible to confine yourself to the document. Yes, my lord. And Roberts bowed to the rebuke with Old Bailey grace. The British case could be presented so quickly and clearly, largely because the thinking behind it had been deliberately simple. Should the tribunal accept the British view that treaties make international law, then the count was not difficult to prove. The British presented to the judges the treaties which Germany had signed, the specific military plans which were put into effect to break them, and the historical facts of unprovoked invasion.
It's one of the oldest and best tournaments in the world.
There was plenty of evidence to support it.
Passion, drama, upsets, heroism, glory, it's got it all.
Pointed out by the eminent historian,
some of the finest players to ever grace the game.
His memorandum, circulated the previous August, argued possibly that it is notoriously difficult to prove intentions from diplomatic
Drogba and Owen. Every one of them
prosecutors had hardly discussed intentions.
Scoring the winner.
They had concentrated on plans which had actually been put into operation and the event which resulted. In this,
who wants to join them in the record?
The American count on conspiracy was, by its very nature,
commitment, but I also want to see control out there.
The Americans had not overcome the problem.
Go out there,
the way in which they developed their base had made it more dangerous to dispute about the British started something which had resulted in reduction in Americans had a heavy emphasis on documents of the town. This was the Hospital Memorandum. They could and did challenge the actual authenticity of the documents produced, suggesting that the Hospital Memorandum was at worst forged, at best an inaccurate and unsubstantial summary, that the Schmundt minutes of Hitler's conference of the 23rd of May 1939 existed in more than one version, with substantial discrepancies between them. They could then go on to show that Hitler had not in practice done exactly what he was reported as threatening. In Hospach's memorandum of Hitler's conference of November 5th,
down to the quarter-final stage in the FA Cup.
Was reported as a
massive day for young Alexander. His first appearance in the competition. I think we're going to find out, Alan, whether he's a big game hunter.
Well, it's a nice stage to come back at, isn't it? He's missed the previous ones, being out on loan, but his granddad, Jim, never lifted this trophy, so it would mean an awful lot if they could get to Wembley and end up winning it.
This is today's Tottenham Hotspur team. The kind of players that we expect, the kind of performances we expect from the individuals trying to make this formation work.
Yeah, I mean, you can at first glance look cautious, but it just depends on the attitude of the players out there. If they've got a foothold in this game, they can get a little bit... Put them in front!
Goal!
That's the reward for putting the ball into the area from a good cross. Finished very well.
I'd love to see those kind of balls swinging into the box. Magnificent.
So the first goal is 1-0. On the attack here. Bojan. Down the shot. Well done the goalkeeper. And he's hung on to the ball.
As a result of the limited charges, the British prosecutors, the defendants began to look increasingly
Played down the wing, keeping the wide attack going. And he's threaded the path through neatly. That's very good defending. And the player had nowhere to go. I've talked a bit more about Jim Hunter because I remember him at Pulham, Alan being the senior citizen amongst us too. He was a fine, fine player. When the FA Cup came around, every year
why?
We never did. But there's a chance now for the grandson done, Alex, to end that particular wrong for the Hunter family?
Well, he's only a couple of games away from Wembley, isn't he? Following replays, so great opportunity to do something his granddad could never manage.
Sherdan Shaqiri. They cope with it well defensively.
Danish government
Trying to find an
official
opening.
protest to the British Foreign
Panicking.
Office.
He's got his shot off now. That was the opening that they've been working so hard to get back on level terms.
And you're right, Martin, they have worked extremely hard. Just let down the death there, what a miss.
Which was not very creditable to the king.
Here's Walker.
Things in London and Nuremberg, he pointed out, had been very enthusiastic about the job.
Kyle Walker.
King Hassan drafted an official reply to the Danes. He said that the bald facts were more than adequate to prove
Good
the
challenge
point
here.
about provoked aggression.
There's going to be a throw-in
That
after
the
that
Danes
tackle.
did not seem to understand the need for relevance and avoidance of the merely
Here's
corrupt.
Bentaleb. And there is some
Probably
backup
it's
for
a
him in this
triumphant
position.
way to prove national peace.
Come on, why would you do it?
Nuremberg, however, the Maxwell Pipe hinted that feelings other than Danish had been hurt. At the moment, Elwin has more sympathy for Canning than any
Marco
right-minded
Arnautovic. Cameron.
After handling their case on Nazi aggression with such dispatch, the British team were not active in court for a month. On either side of the Christmas recess,
Just
the
working
Americans
away to
resumed
try and
the
find an
conspiracy
opening.
charge, then introduced their case against the
That's a chatter.
organisation. The remaining British efforts
back
on
with an
mid-January
interception.
went into the presentation of the cases against individuals.
Nabil Bentaleb.
There's
good progress with this attack.
Unimpressive business.
Tried to tackle him, and he's done that.
Americans, and seeming to be carried out at random.
Fuck.
Arnautovic.
During the organization's case, or when the prosecutor responsible had his material ready. And there was little dramatic about it. A few phrases were made about
Alex
each
Hunter.
man, relevant documents submitted with few extracts read, just serial
Here's
numbers.
Bentaleb.
The public at large have had little idea of the nature of the cases against the men. in
Now
the
it goes into the wider
The
areas
British,
where they've got a
having
winger
been
waiting.
allocated the diplomat, Neurath and Papa,
Looked very good indeed, but the move has broken down.
to develop their case.
The referee hasn't stopped it. Stoke City could play on. They had the ball. There would have been a free kick to them.
They were also responsible for the same, Raider and Den, which gave the further responsibility of presenting the case against the German Navy.
Ooh, that was tough.
Trying to switch on the attacking power in this situation. The referee has chosen to add on 2 extra
The
minutes.
Admirals were charged on the first 3 counts.
Patience is the name of the game at the moment.
Easy to prosecute.
Well, this is how this team can place in the
At
semi-final.
counts 1 and 2, it could be shown that he had held high command in the Navy and cabinet rank. He had attended the
Now
key
it's time to
meetings
go
where
again
it
for
was
the
alleged
second
Hitler
45
had
minutes in this
expanded his
quarter-final
aggressive
of the Emirates FA Cup.
There was evidence to
Really
suggest
went
that
at
he had
it
been
in
responsible
the
for
first half.
building up
You
the German
wonder
Navy
whether we're going to see some
in
tired legs
contravention
as
of
the second
limits
half wears
imposed
on.
by the Versailles Settlement. He had
Into the
supervised the
attacking
drawing
third.
up of naval plans for
Driving
actual
away,
alleged
trying
aggression
to find
and
room for a
leading to
shot
the Navy
maybe.
invasion of foreign
Strong
territory.
challenge.
There was evidence too to link him with criminal orders and war
Lovely
crimes.
one-touch football.
Oh, you shit.
Oh, it could be Jeff. We are level again.
Why
Some
would
of the justice about it because the better team have been losing. Now they've equalised. They'll be thinking about winning. Momentum is with them after this equalising goal.
He had been a relatively junior officer
ready for Tottenham
until he
Hotspur.
succeeded Raider as commander of the
Moving
Navy.
forward with some danger to the opposition now here.
His role had
He's
been
whacked that
limited
away,
to
out of
the
play.
submarines. He had not until then been a member of the
Wanyama.
Imperial General Staff.
Looking to play his teammate through.
He had not been
Good, strong
personally
tackle.
involved in Hitler's strategy.
He's got his tackle
or that
in.
of the Navy as a whole.
Ball's gone out now.
His work and ambition had always been seen as that of a
Here's
serving
the
naval.
cross.
Yeah, beautiful. Like,
His successor,
don't even make a run to try and get the ball. Just like wait until the ball is there and then run after like a fucking idiot.
and secure relatively favourable terms from the Allies, rather than as a sign
Played to
of
Glenn
Germany's
Johnson.
high standing in Nazi circles.
City are getting ready to make a
Given the
change
weakness
there.
of the case against Ernest on the first 2 counts, the emphasis of the prosecution had
Arnautovic.
therefore replaced on
Good
count
forward
3,
play from them.
war crime. The prosecutors had to show that German
Brilliant
naval
technique
warfare
in the
had been
tackle.
criminal. Here, their real problems began. The British Admiralty had
No,
always
cut
been
backwards,
dubious about the
fucking
desirability of a case against the German conduct.
I think my situation is like run into the installation.
Rather, they knew that the laws of naval warfare were notoriously vague and dangerously open to conflicting interpretation once sailors were faced with practical situations at sea. They still are. Furthermore, many of the laws of naval warfare were recognized as obsolete by the time of the Second World War. The 1907 Hague Convention status and immunities of neutrals for those of merchantmen who were
anybody, least of all the player. Didn't have any complaints about that.
Had dealt with the use of balloons in wartime, but not that of submarines.
Okay, so I'm not
to regulate submarine warfare in regard to merchant ships was made in the London Protocol of 1936. According to this agreement, except in cases where a merchantman persistently refused to stop or actively resisted search, it must not be sunk until its crew, passengers and ship's papers had been put in a place of safety, which meant either being taken aboard another vessel or being provided with lifeboats and assured of safe weather conditions and the proximity of land. As such regulations already apply to the sinking of naval craft by surface vessels. However, existing law allowed that rescue of survivors need not be an absolute priority if it endangered the safety of the mission of the ship which had carried out the sinking. What the London Protocol had failed to take into account was that submarines on the surface would become as vulnerable as turtles on the deck. During the war, the development of radar, the increased use of spotter planes, and the introduction of improved radio communications for even the most primitive ships had endangered all vessels by 1939, and submarines especially. They could seldom afford to spend time securing the safety of others. Scrupulous attention to the rules on giving warning of attack and help to survivors was clearly in conflict with those aspects of the law which allowed consideration of one's own safety. All shipping, neutral, merchant, crippled, was a potential danger to submarines. In October 1945, Humphrey Waldo, a legal expert at the Admiralty and later president of the International Court at The Hague, had written a carefully reasoned memorandum explaining these and other legal problems. It was dismissed by the Foreign Office as typical Admiralty whitewashing of the German Navy. But it was not whitewashing. It was the considered opinion of a distinguished lawyer, backed by the expert knowledge of experienced sailors who were well qualified to speak on standard practice in all cases. Its warning of legal difficulties in a case against the German Navy needed to be taken very seriously. The legal foundations of the British case were seemingly weak. Once they began to sift the evidence, looking for specific examples of war crimes at sea, the whole structure appeared shaky. An obvious problem was that when ships and crews were suspected to have been destroyed, no evidence remained. And significantly, by the time the indictment was completed in October, the wording of the charges relating to the German Navy remained vague. The indictment alleged murder and ill treatment of persons on the high seas. It gave no details, named no incident. Gurnett spotted the absence of actual cases immediately and commented on it in his interrogations at the end of October. He must already have been aware that the case against him on the first two counts was poor, and taken comfort from this hint that evidence on war crimes was proving hard to find. He had every right to feel optimistic. By the 13th of November, Maxwell Fyfe was complaining that the naval case in general seemed slight, and that there was not much of a case against Gurnett. It is, however, the most essential skill in any barrister to be able to make silk purses out of sound ears. And the British did at least have the entire German naval archive at their disposal in the Citadel on Whitehall. A team under Major Kenneth Duke, assisted by WRNS and some ex-German sergeants in the Pioneer Corps, went to work on the document. Gradually, they gleaned enough to mount a promising case. Evidence was found which suggested that Raeder might be linked with Hitler's plans to raise Leningrad to the ground. There was proof that he had passed on the commando order in October 1942, that two British commandos caught during the Bordeaux raid had been shot by a naval firing party, and that on other occasions the Navy had handed commandos to the SS for execution. Other documents showed Raeder's cynical view of the laws of the sea a determination to fight the naval war by foul means if fair ones did not get the results he called for. In a memo in 1939, he had expressed the intention that measures which are considered necessary from a military point of view, provided a decisive success can be expected from them, will have to be carried out, even if they are not covered by existing international law. It was very different from saying that naval law was ambiguous. He had added that in principle, any means of warfare which is effective in breaking enemy resistance should be based on some legal conception, even if that entails the creation of a new code of naval warfare. Rader was prepared to invent them, or to invent practical justifications for action. In 1939, he had recorded that Hitler had given permission to sink neutral ships without warning in areas such as the Bristol Channel, in which the fiction of mine danger can be upheld. An even more blatant invention was uncovered in the archives in the Citadel dealing with the sinking of the Athene on the 3rd of September 1939 on her way to North America. Nazi propaganda had claimed she had been sunk by a British submarine as a stratagem to lure Americans into the war, an attempt to update the Lusitania affair. Rader had made public accusations to this effect against churches. Hawkeye Brenz, however, spotted that the logbook of the U-boat, which had in fact carried out the attack, had been forged, and that the official naval war diary had been falsified. Thereafter, an affidavit could be obtained from a member of the U-30's crew and an admission from Dönitz that he had been aware, though disapproving, of the line. Evidence against Dönitz was less easy to come. When possible material was found, the Admiralty immediately applied wet blankets to the prosecutor's enthusiasm.
White Hart Lane, as we know it, isn't going to be here much longer, as the new stadium is being built even as we speak.
It'll be sad to see it go, but what it does have is a marvellous atmosphere. It can be an intimidating one because the fans are close to the pitch, but I know they are conscious of building the new one with the same kind of feel. It has got an awful lot of history, this place.
This is today's Tottenham Hotspur team. I think that back four is really important for them. They've got to be strong and solid. They've got a bit of protection, haven't they?
They have. They should have more than enough. I mean, they're all good defenders in their own rights, but players who are going to be really hard. They can be a fit on the front foot. We'll wait and see.
Here's the Southampton team for you. Well, it's 4-4-2 for them today, but we think the middle four might be a dime a dozen.
Yeah, and it gives them a bit of solidity in the middle of the park. And I think the onus is on the full-backs to provide the width in this.
Penalty.
Pretty robust start to the game. It's certainly a foul, and the referee's kept his cards in his pocket.
Must be made at rescuing members of ships sunk, and this includes picking up persons in the water and putting them in lifeboats and handing over food and water. Rescue runs counter to the rudimentary demands of warfare for the destruction of enemy ships.
You don't need to see all the cards here from the referee, and he's keeping the cards in his pocket. Just a free kick. These days, coming off your feet like that is the risk of the referee taking serious action.
Yeah, I think so. Poor tackling was badly timed.
And that it had, in any case, been variously interpreted by submarine command. It was the prosecutor's contention, however, that even if the order was not a clear incitement to murder, it was at least ambiguous, and that Dönitz must take responsibility for the fact that it had been defined as incitement.
Looking for an opening with some good control
The case of the fishing
His
crew had been
attack was looking good. Now the opposition have a chance.
And that of the Antonica, where survivors again came under fire as they put out in the ship.
Well, this
To
attack,
substantiate the
a bit of menace
allegation
to
that
it.
the Laconia order
Oh,
was
he's won it
intended
back.
to
That's a
establish a
really good
policy of
tackle.
deliberate
He's
murder
got
of
support
survivors.
here.
The
Well, it's a nice
British
finish.
Going to try his luck.
the
The goalkeeper has done well to stop that one.
Those for you,
You fucking idiot!
It's going to be a throw here.
No, you, why, God, why? No.
He had attended a lecture by Dönitz in which the
Offside.
Oh, well saved.
It's
a chance. No, it's offside.
And pointed out that the Allies were finding it difficult to man their ships after you
Kyle
both
Walker.
Go.
Isaac's evidence.
Nice. Just fucking nice. Don't make the run.
However, Isaac was a very young man at the time of the left.
Well, the tackle there has led to a throw.
More significantly, he was the only witness to claim that Dernitz had ever expressed. Even more damaging for the ultimate value of his testimony was the fact that he had been interrogated at the time of the court-martial in Hamburg.
Alex Hunter.
Go. Three of his crew from the machine gunning and so he had the survivors of the Pelly. A brief check on charges with the British in the Atlantic. Eck had never claimed in his defense that he was acting on orders.
Great passage of passing play there. Supporting player alongside.
Putting the blame on Dernitz. His life was probably forfeited.
Credit for taking on the shot. What a good chance that was for him. By his standards, that's a glaring miss.
Isaac's affidavit was signed after Eck's sentence had been passed and confirmed. The second prosecution witness, Captain Muller, was equally
but he couldn't find his supporting player.
Because when captured, he had been accused of issuing the Laconia order to others. A witness who might be literally talking to save his own neck cannot be seen as very reliable. In mid-1941, Muller had been flotilla commander at sea, responsible for fitting out U-boats and for briefing commanders on their orders and missions.
He tried
He
his luck.
claimed that when he asked his superiors about the Laconia order, he was told it was an instruction to kill survivors. He had passed it on, but now maintained that he had always issued the caveat that everybody had to handle this according to his own conscience. His evidence was not substantial. Everything was what a man in a tight spot might be
attacking power in this situation.
Oh, you fucking idiot. If you had moved quicker. No, Alex Hunter's a fucking idiot.
Isaac was forced to admit the difference between a prohibition against rescuing survivors, which could be proved by the available evidence and according
Trying
to
to
the law,
cross it, and in the end, a bit of a waste, I think.
for which the only evidence was
bit of a
his
waste.
Muller had no option but to agree with Kranzmüller that naval standing orders urged taking of prisoners on the grounds that they were valuable sources of intelligence, and that commanders disobeying the orders on the correct treatment of neutrals had been court-martialed. But these were relatively minor concessions, and just for the moment, the case against Dernitz and on naval warfare in general seemed stronger than had originally been believed. For one thing, the British had presented it in court with reasonable assurance. More importantly, though, he had not as yet
spread it out wide here. Chance to get some width into this attack.
No, that's not. I don't understand this game. He fucking knows the players are making runs.
Then just lost the concentration, lost the ball as well. Going to work hard to try and get it back. Davids.
There was too big a gap between the British assertion that there had been a number of
the ball to the opposition.
German Navy, as in any force of any nation, and the contention that their criminal behaviour had been ordered and directed by their commander.
Substitution for Spurs coming up.
No, you...
After his cross-examination of Muller, Villamore, whose witness he had been, had to announce that the British were dropping their charge that U-boats had attacked rescue ships. Muller had shown that rescue ships were not legally entitled to protect them. His knowledge of naval law was greater than the British, and he had 20 more in his school. He had made the first defence breach in the prosecution team, albeit a fairly minor one.
No, why would I want to pass it to the fucking...
Once Kranzmüller spoke to the defence force. The only indications of the naval case and the corner devoted to listing documents in cases against individual defendants, the attention of the accused in the box often wrong.
There should be like a fucking like number system where you can just like shout the number.
Quickened again, however, on the 17th of January, when the French chief prosecutor
goes straight to the opposition.
rose to open France's case on war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in Western Europe. He spoke for 4.5 hours, and according to the Times, there were graver faces in the dock than at any time since the trial began. It was a grave occasion for the French, too.
spotted a teammate and got the technique as well as the vision to switch the play. It goes out wide again.
So fucking get in the box, you.
And the cross is in, trying to pick out Di Maria. And we'll see with these possessions. The game has been conceded without the figures to back that up.
Yeah, I mean, coming into this match, Arsenal would be evenly matched. It's been the case here.
Well, this attack, a bit of menace to it. Just working away to try and find an opening.
France had suffered German invasion and occupation. Toronto was to speak now for all those
Great understanding this team. Just look at the passing. Linked up well.
Such experience should be expected to cover Toronto's opening even to government. German occupation had led its in every country which had endured. It had left a hatred of Germany. It had also created a festering sore of suspicion and vengefulness against
Why don't you just like demote him back
everywhere in Europe at the end of the war? The people had turned on collaborators. We had politicians, profiteers, men who had betrayed resistance workers, or girls who had had affairs with German soldiers. Everywhere there were court proceedings, lynchings, beatings up, smashed windows, shaved heads. In France, an official purge had been launched. By the end of April 1945, the courts of justice had condemned 1,458 collaborators to death. Official circles were then talking of investigating up to 100,000 cases. But already by July, the momentum of vengeance was snapping, and there were complaints that whole groups were being spared. Economic collaborators, the magistracy, police and armed forces, the middle echelons of government. The complaints grew as prisoners of war and deportees at last came home and fanned the hatred for those who had helped Germany. In the view of an OSS report, the main failure of the purge had been in not satisfying the French demand for justice, not providing justice, which had been hoped for to cleanse France of the corruption brought by 4 years of collaborationist intrigues and betrayal. A bitterness at this failure had come to the surface in the trial of Pierre Laval. He was sentenced to death on the 9th of October. Today Quisling in Norway.
Well, we've still got half an hour to go, and we're going to see now Alex Hunter.
But before Laval was sentenced, there had been outbreaks of public display.
3-1 up, and Alex Hunter would have been told just to put himself about, make sure he does his running and sees through this lead they've got.
A scandal in the history of French jurisprudence. There were calls for the overhaul of the entire French legal system. The foreign observers of the trial had feared that the Nuremberg tribunal would inevitably sink to the same level of anarchy and lose any semblance of dispassionate justice.
The opposing defender probably said to him, "Go on, shoot."
It was therefore
he hadn't got the technique to bury it from that distance.
No, and he had options left and right as well, so a poor decision.
He himself had experienced occupation and exile. He had been closely identified with the resistance. He was a politician and also aware of the intensity of feelings of those who had suffered under the
and they've scored again. It was a wonderful watch, that goal.
The defenders seemed to lose the concentration almost. They saw it coming from a long way out. And look at the player, delighted with it.
Very good game, 3-2.
He asserted the strength of international law as the basis of the charge.
We're going to make
The
the change.
tribunal's right to try Nazi criminals
Good through ball.
loss of Scotland.
Eriksson!
And the deliberate transfer of judicial power
For them in the match, they've lost their lead now to 2 ahead. They played well to this point. Sometimes a 2-goal lead can be a dangerous one. We'll see. Expecting even more goals. 4-2 is the score. That looks promising.
He accepted that no nation had a totally clean conscience, that war generates crimes by people of all nationalities. But he maintained that in examining the Nazi and German culprits, their former enemies could view their own consciences free.
Patience is the name of the game
There
at
was
the
no
moment.
common measure between them. Then, in his final words,
Good
He
strong
called on the
tackle.
tribunal to make its judgment
Been thrown out after the tackle.
history of international
Now they've
law.
got a chance in this part of the
Preparation
pitch.
for a society which excluded
Stopped
recourse to war,
emphatically and just
and
as
which
well.
enlisted
The
force
impressive way
permanently in
looked
the
very
service of the
encouraging.
justice of nations.
To freshen things up a bit here, West Brom, I think, with a
For justice
substitution.
of the martyred peoples will be satisfied, and their suffering will not have been useless to the progress of mankind.
Into the
That is
attacking
stimulating
third.
at front as the speech ends.
In with a chance.
That is more like the
It's a
European
goal.
mentality. It will be a
Two for
pleasure
him
to
on the
argue with
day.
that man.
Two very well taken goals.
It was the Frenchman,
Picking off again 4-3 the scoreline.
A front was to be denied the pleasure of crossing forward with the French prosecutor.
So we're coming down now towards the last 15 minutes.
with the French Consultative
Really
Assembly
on top of their
and
game
the
now.
posted French
Wonderful
Minister of
understanding. Well, he's
His
got
role
support
as
here.
leader of the French
He can
team
take possession in his
taken
own
by
half.
Jean-Pierre
Good play, but
a
they've
former
lost the ball
high-ranking
now.
civil servant,
The
and a man who
opposition
had
can get at
escaped from
them.
a German prison in
Turnover,
1941
possession here.
and lived with the Marquis until the liberation. Francis Biddle discovered several years later that Jean-Pierre David's uncle
Cutting those passes out in that middle of the park.
Jean-Pierre David was to become president of the Council
Moving
of the
forward
Republic.
with some danger to the opposition now they're here.
But died soon after.
No, you fucking idiot. Why don't you tackle?
Have a corner now.
Yeah.
10 minutes left of regular time. And here's the shot.
Go. And I'm going to...
It was reckoned out of the 2,100 finally...
See that, when I wanted in a fucking position, when I wanted there, you...
Clearly, an attempted pass.
Saw that their documents was inequitable. Nearly all of them were German, unanswerable.
They've lost the ball in a bad area.
Statistics did not supply
Definitely haven't
the
cleared the
national
danger
reports
yet.
from each of the countries.
It's Alex Hunter. Oh, saved by the goalkeeper at full
the
strength.
economic spoliation of Europe over destruction almost beyond imagining. And also because each report warned that the scale of Palladian havoc had been so great that it was still not possible to estimate the final total. Some of the figures were difficult to grasp, and they certainly made little impact on the battles or in the press. For instance, it needed a degree of financial knowledge and understanding of each country's economy to absorb such figures as those for financial seizures over and above what was legally permitted for occupation costs. In Denmark,
It's been a thrilling contest this, and we're into the last knockings of it. The supporters, well, they're not showing any sign of losing their stamina, they've been great.
Yeah, always love coming to this ground, one of the best atmospheres around, they've not disappointed.
For the maintenance of her army of occupation was 74,000 million francs. Yet the final French payment had come to 745,000 million, 10 times larger. It was hard to picture information such as that the Germans had requisitioned without payment 70 million crowns worth of Danish agricultural produce each month, or seized 1,100 million guilders worth of machinery and oil as they left Holland. The specific was easier to envisage. From Norway alone, the Nazis had taken 30,000 tons of meat, 61,000 tons of dairy produce, 26,000 tons of fish, 68,000 tons of fruit and vegetables, 112,000 tons of fat, 300,000 tons of hay and straw, 13,000 tons of soap. In Holland, they seized 600,000 hogs, 275,000 cows, 489 locomotives, 28,950 freight cars, and even 1 million bicycles and 600,000 radio sets. As the torrent of statistics poured out, the mind tended to block them. Yet those who stopped to reflect realized what these figures had finally added up. As J.M. Williams of the Christian Science Monitor put
Most
it,
of the football clubs that you know well in London are north of the River Thames, but pride of South London,
it is not
Crystal
simply as
Palace
a
here
result
at
of the
Selhurst
war,
Park.
but also the
Talk
manner in
about
which the
thumping
Germans
atmospheres.
Even
Nothing
those
like
people they
it. Cocking
overran
the fans
without
behind the
need
one
for their
pole,
own
they do
public
not stop
approval
singing for the entire
and therefore
match.
supplying help to the defeated Germans themselves.
Here's the Crystal Palace team.
Bombing and fighting by both sides had
Responsibility
done
for
much
some
to
of those
destroy
five
them.
in midfield
But pillaged by the
to get
Germans
forward.
alone also
I'm
brought
sure
a
the
terrible
main striker won't be
disappointment that the
isolated, although
legacy
it
of
looks a bit
poverty
like that on our screens.
Yeah, he could be a
The
lonely man
arithmetic of
top
crime never
there
helped the popular
if he doesn't get
imagination.
the support that he needs, because he is the
There was no
type of
time to
player
work
that does
out
need
the
support.
thing.
He can't do it all on his
We
own.
urged to present the details of
This
crime
is
in
today's
each of the
Tottenham
Western
Hotspur
countries
team.
also lost the French the
Got his
sympathy
shot
of
off
the
now.
Germans. Inevitably, the French were not only repeating points already made by the Americans in the conspiracy
Well, they're in
charge,
good position
they
here.
were repeating their own points. The
Goal for the through pass.
The French
Able to make a good interception.
already on the second day of their case,
Nicely
Gilbert was
worked until
complaining
that
in his
point
own-
when
the
it
French
broke
are going
down.
horribly
Now
slow.
they've got to try and
Step
regain
by
possession.
step, with little news. However, he added, we think we should...
No,
Easy
see, there's a guy there as well. Why
Pass
didn't...
wasn't really a very thoughtful one.
That's out and get a popular on aspect of forced labour and pillage.
Victor Wanyama.
Models of forensic
challenge
brevity
here.
and succinctness, despite the massive weight of the case they were forced to present. The Daily Telegraph reported.
Hotspur in possession
Well,
here.
in spite of the fact that Bill
Gone out over the touchline, that'll be a throw for the opposition.
He's doing a really first-rate job
Joel
on
Ford.
the Germanization of occupied territories. He let off steam in a letter to his wife, seemingly written in court, and complained...
Does read the
"The
game well,
French
this
are
lad.
still on this morning.
Well
Proving such
defended,
highly
not just
important
heading
material
across,
as the
he
grains in
thought
our
quickly
south
as well.
that the population must not wear berets.
Strong challenge.
Under penalty of going to concentration camp. I tried to curb and shorten their endless zeal.
Wasteful
But the
pass,
Russians, with an eye
unforced
on
error,
their case,
really.
which is to start next week, strenuously object to any interference. And the judge's patience finally snapped on the 30th of January, when you both presented the case on the use of labour in concentration camps.
On to the attack now.
Shit.
A lot of defenders between them and the goal, but they've still got the ball.
He simply could not handle the quantity.
Tottenham get it back
He
again.
failed to produce the necessary certificate of
Nabil
authenticity
Bentaleb.
for many of his patrons. He had not indexed. He confused their official numbers. And he had failed to realize that some languages take up more space than others. So the numbering of pages in
Ericsson.
document books would vary, and no one could find...
Oh, you fucking idiot.
It was a model that had threatened many prosecuting counsels. They
Benteke.
too had found the established procedure
Here's a chance to attack.
documents to
Played into the middle.
Catch it, catch it, catch it, catch
That's the
it.
goalkeeper's ball. Quite clearly a wasted cross.
Dealing with the confusion between Lawrence and Dubot over French documents was circulated among the prosecutors.
No, that's not what I wanted.
But Dubot had reached
That was my
an
fault.
unparalleled level of incompetence. And at a time when the tribunal was ready to burst from irritation and boredom with repetition and cumulative evidence.
Could be dangerous.
Burst of the Dubot.
In towards
His
the
case was
dangerous
frequently
Benteke.
interrupted, particularly at the instigation of the American government. They criticized him for mistakes he had not made. Lawrence, usually the most
Passes,
patient and
keeping the
careful
ball.
of men, had to apologize
Keeps it
when he
going.
found a marginal note on the document which he had claimed. was
Stopped
missing.
emphatically and just
At
as
one
well.
point,
The
Maxwell
approach
Fyfe
looked
stepped
very
forward to fight
encouraging.
off another tribunal attack and pointed out that Dubot,
Lamela,
for one,
supporting
had
player
actually given
alongside.
verification
They
of the
cope with it
source
well
of the document
defensively.
he was presenting. For all the judges had assumed he had not.
Cabaye.
The French are very grateful for British help, recorded Dean.
Did well, stuck out a foot.
The French had so
Cut off the pass.
scrupulously avoided emotionalism that their presentation
Well, they
finally
move
provoked
forward again with Alex
criticism by
Hunter.
one observer that it was
And the verdict on added
and
time
they
is
seemed
2
to be an act of
minutes.
crime in their bookings.
Angel Di
The
Maria.
February
Need to try and get the ball back now.
this day, which is the 100th session of the tribunal, the French counsel, with a voice so toneless as to be without any meaning, presents a completely
Well,
useless
this is the time
expose
where
of
the
the
managers
of
really
our
earn their
trade
money.
in Iran.
It's going to be an
This
alteration.
work had been done
Try and
completely
improve
by
the
the
team.
Americans, and even then it was a work of supererogation. But there is no disposition to stop, and with complete murder in my heart, I am compelled to suffer in silence.
Angel Di Maria.
Insipid, flat, depressing voice.
Probing away. Trying to find room for a shot, maybe.
That sort of
Good
reaction
challenge.
was a pity, because as Patrick
Great
Dean
passage
commented,
of
so
passing
much of
play
the French
there.
material was
Defender blocks the cross.
they have painted a picture not just of Nazi financial
Joe Ledley.
spoliation and the stripping of industrial
Joel
and
Ward.
agricultural goods, but of squalid, organized looting
Two.
activities and furniture.
Having a little game of their own here.
Slipped up and set the Germans. They had shown that where the Nazis could not obtain
now they've got a chance in this part of the pitch.
Offside.
Comes in with the tackle. They passed their way up into a good position here, then just lost the concentration, lost the ball as well. They're going to work hard to try and get it back. Doing well to keep the ball. Well, that looked promising, but he's been stopped. And here's the shot. Now we have a corner to come via that deflection.
The acute insecurity resulting from the national evil policy, by which French civilians disappeared without warning and with no indication to relatives of what had happened.
Trying to get the cross in, well blocked by the defender. There's a lot of joy in the fact that Alex Hunter is doing well. His teammates, they can see him winning matches for them, so why not? And the manager likewise, but I think it's more than that with the manager. He's a father-son type thing. It's working very well for both parties.
Yeah, not only the manager's favourite, but a crowd favourite here too. Certainly one that the teammates enjoy playing with him, produces what he's capable of.
In retaliation for German death, Hitler had ordered that Danes must be killed in the proportion of 5
until they got that challenge in.
In fact, the occupying forces had only achieved a total which equaled
substitution for Spurs coming up.
Between the beginning of 1944 and the end of the war, 267 Danes, nearly all well known, had been killed in their homes. In cases where the police had caught the murderers, the prisoners received letters of congratulation from him. The French, too, had the details of chronic hunger that was imposed on the inhabitants of Nazi-occupied countries. In France, where the population was accustomed to an average of 3,000 calories a day, the ration was limited to 1,800 calories from September 1940, and it fell to 900 by the end of the war. 1,000 for those engaged in heavy labour, only 850 for the elderly. In Holland, the situation was worse. The Dutch were fortunate to get 400 calories a day by April 1945, and Dutch figures excluded those for the winter of famine. Goering had said, "If famine is to reign, it will not reign in Germany." And food had indeed been stripped from occupied Europe for the use of the Germans. The results were summarized by Charles Gertler. The exhaustion is such that, despite the generous aid brought by the United Nations, the situation of the occupied countries is still alarming. In fact, the complete absence of stock, the insufficiency of the means of production and transport, the reduction of livestock and the economic disorganization do not permit the allocating of sufficient rations at this time. He read a report of the Dean of the Faculty of Medicine in Paris, which suggested that in their provision of rations, the Nazis seemed as if they wished to organize the decline of the health of adolescents and adults. Babies, at least, had been adequately fed. The French had a tale to tell of the horrors of forced labor, which would only be surpassed in nastiness by that of the Russians. In occupied Western Europe, men and women were drafted into designated infantry. Many of them were forced to work, contrary to all international regulations, on military projects. 248,000 labourers were constructing the Atlantic Wall by March 1943. Worse than forced labour at home was deportation to work in Germany. 1,293,000 people were taken from the West by April 1940. Germany, they worked on average 11 hours a day. Segregating race is young. Whatever it takes. Fine for my
Well, the huge news of this transfer window, obviously, Cristiano Ronaldo switched from Real Madrid to Juventus, and now he takes centre stage.
That was the sale. That was the official description of the whereabouts of the team.
The entire season has built to this. A huge moment on the biggest stage. Someone will make the difference. This is it.
Because the camp was becoming overcrowded. The defenders could not bear it. several of them remain. Madame Léon Couturier gave details of her experiences at Auschwitz and Ravensbrück. Her revolting story tumbled out so quickly that the interpreters could not keep up. Fiddle could only note, "It is hard to give the impression of the long monotony of horror." Dr. D. how the flesh had loosened from his bones. On and on went the stories. Listeners could hear no more. The trial is being surfeited by the most murderous and revolting record of all time, at the time. Session after session, they were hearing a hideous recital of crime. Every witness told something new in horror and misery. The long agony of Europe was being put on record. The witnesses were speaking for those who had suffered and died. But, said Burkitt, from the point of view of the trial, it is a complete waste of time. The case has been proved over and over again. Neither does the world need it anymore, for all over the world the evidence has been published. But it seems impossible to stop it, or to check the volume of it. It also seemed impossible that stories more appalling would be heard, that details more sickening, atrocities on an even greater scale could exist. But on the 8th of February, the Russians opened their case on war crimes and crimes against humanity and evil. Goering had been looking forward to the Russian case. He thought it would concentrate on him,